Bio 245, this is Vanessa again, and we are now on to week 8, and this is going to be nervous tissue stuff. So I'm just going to kind of go down the list. I'm not going to go super in depth on some of this more definitional stuff, but if I think I can demonstrate on a model, I will, or just like you see up on the board in a drawing. So the first couple words you've heard before. You've heard of neurons because we talked about nervous tissue, we talked about how these are cells that communicate with one another, and we talked last time about neuromuscular junctions where we had an action potential from the neuron, and so it could release neurotransmitters onto the muscle and cause a chain reaction down that way. Talking to neurons, it's the same deal. They have an action potential, they can release neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters go to the next neuron, and then that neuron can interpret that information as necessary. Okay? So neurons are communicative cells, is what I want you to take away from this, and they're the big branchy cells of the nervous system. Glial cells are just little support guys, so they come in lots of different flavors. You only need to know 2 for the scope of this lab, and they both lay down a certain material called myelin, which we'll talk about. But glial cells are support cells, so they help keep the neurons happy and keep them protected and get rid of detritus in the nervous system. Now, next on your list has central and peripheral nervous system, so you'll often hear these referred to as the CNS and the PNS. So the CNS is just central. It's the brain and spinal cord. So you can see that in green. And you still can't see it in orange, yes. So then your peripheral nervous system is everything that branches away from your spinal cord. So that means the nerves that innervate your limbs, your gut, etc., those are all considered to be peripheral. Okay, so yes, there you go. Moving on to the cell. Let's talk about the cell a little bit. And I actually have an excellent model here for this cell that I think you guys will like. I mean, I like it. I think it's cool. So here it is. This is our neuron cell. You guys know a lot of this terminology already. So for example, nucleus you guys are familiar with, because a neuron is just like any normal cell. It has your standard cellular components. So here is your nucleus, Golgi apparatus, as is per usual. So as you go down, however, you'll notice that there's something called dendrites, right? So dendrites in this case are going to be the branches coming off of the cell body, and they receive messages from other cells, okay? So going down a little bit further on your list it'll go dendrite, Golgi, Nissl bodies, axon, synaptic knob. Synaptic knob is what I want you to focus in on. So you can see on this particular model that, yes, we have these little branchies coming off. I think you can kind of see that. Oh, this one looks...
You can see them in the background too.
This one's the best one that you can see. Okay, so we have this blue branch coming off of our cell body. That's a dendrite. That's, again, the receiving end. And you can see that there's this guy kind of planted on top. He's like this little shape here. So that's going to be your synaptic knob presented on this model. So, in other words, it's an axon terminal coming from another cell. So we talked about axon terminals when we talked about that neuromuscular junction. This is a synaptic knob coming from some other neuron somewhere to talk to this cell. Okay, because like I said, the dendrite is the receiving end. So that's where it's going to be receiving its message. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to clarify that the dendrite is different from the synaptic knob, and they have different functions as well. Okay. Next on your list that's weird from dendrite and then Golgi we already showed you, is Nissl body. So in this case, the Nissl body is just your rough endoplasmic reticulum. So you can see here, it's this typical ER shape, but it has these colorful sprinkles on it. So that's going to be your Nissl bodies there. These are the guys that pick up dye with something called a Nissl stain. So when they figured out that the Nissl stain was just staining rough endoplasmic reticulum, they called them Nissl bodies, or vice versa. They called them Nissl bodies in the first place and then discovered that they were rough endoplasmic reticulum. Anyway. Just know that these are rough endoplasmic reticulum, but they have a special name for neurons, and it's called the Nissl bodies. Next is your axon on the list. So if I said that the dendrites are receiving the message, the axon is sending the message. And we talked about this when we talked about the neuromuscular junction as well, that the cell tries to generate an action potential, and it sends it all the way down the neuron, or the axon, excuse me, and here it even shows a neuromuscular junction. Here's a muscle, I believe, yeah, a muscle cell right here, and it's showing that these synaptic terminals on there too. So yeah, so this is the axon. It sends that action potential elsewhere to release neurotransmitter through the synaptic knob onto some other cell, if it's a neuron, onto the dendrites or what have you. Okay? Hopefully that makes some sense. Next on your list is axon hillock. So you guys will learn more about action potentials in the scope of your lecture. But if this is the axon, so this long tube that comes off of the end of our neuron, this little portion right here, you see where it's cell body here, and it starts to turn into your axon. This is your axon hillock. So like I said, the action potential can be generated in the soma and the soma is the cell body. I should just mention that. Soma is the cell body of a neuron. But it can generate the action potential in the cell body and send the action potential down the axon. But this area right here, the axon hillock, super important, very porous to sodium and starts the action potential. It's kind of a go or no here. If this place is activated, there will be an action potential. If it is not, there won't be. Okay, so we've talked pretty much about the cell, so now we can talk about these next few terms on your list. So let's scoot this back up again. Okay, there. So next on your list, you'll notice it has this unipolar neuron, multipolar neuron, bipolar neuron. So when they're talking about poles, what they're talking about are attachments to the cell body. Okay, so for attachments to the cell body, obviously uni means one, bi means two, multi means more than two. Okay, so here I've drawn a neuron where we have the cell body here. Okay, and then here's its single point of attachment to this long branch. So you guys probably think of dendrites and axons as very separate from each other. They are functionally. But in the case of this guy, a unipolar neuron, because he has one point of attachment to this long branch here, the dendrites could be somewhere over here, the axons could be somewhere over here. And they are functionally different up until this point, but the cell body links onto it right there. This allows for super fast transduction of a reflex, for example. You don't want it to sit there and be processed in the soma. You want it to go from here to there. Boom. Okay. These are your bipolars. So you can see that I have circled in orange. Here's one pole and here's the other. This is the cell body. Dendrites may be coming off of here. Axon may be coming off of here. Okay. So you'll typically find these in your sensory systems. But again, still allows for a fast movement of that action potential from one end to the other to send that message quickly. Here we have a multipolar neuron, and it's multipolar because here's a pole coming off that cell body, here's a pole, here's a pole, here's a pole, here's a pole, and here's a pole. Okay, so you can see just like the model that we were looking at a little bit ago, that was also a multipolar neuron. You can see that here's our dendrites coming off. Dendrites comes from the word dendros, meaning trees. So whenever you see these branches, you should be thinking about trees. Hopefully you think about dendrites and the word dendros, but you should be thinking about trees. That's what these guys are. They're receiving stuff. So anyway, here's their dendrites receiving that information. That's all going to culminate in the soma here, and then that decision about whether or not there's going to be an action potential will be decided here in the axon hillock, and then that action potential can go down the axon. Okay. And if I really want you to take anything away about just axons and dendrites in general, it's that axons are sending a message, dendrites are receiving a message. Okay? That's what I really would like you to take away from just today. Okay? Dendrites will receive a message from some other neuron via synapse, and then it's going to culminate here. There's going to be an action potential here at the axon hillock, and then that action potential will propagate down the axon and send that message elsewhere. Okay? All right. So, let's move on to another video. So check out the next video. We're going to be talking about the spinal cord, and you're going to have lots of fun.